These allegations are entirely unfounded. The truth is not a matter of opinion, it is a matter of evidence. All relevant evidence has been carefully preserved and documented, including audio recordings, written communications, witness statements, and video material. This evidence has been submitted to appropriate judicial authorities in order to pursue legal action for attempted extortion, falsification of evidence, misappropriation of funds, and personal property.
So here's the situation unfolding right now. Ilia Topuria, who holds the UFC lightweight championship, has finally decided to speak up after his ex-wife Georgina Euskategui kept dragging his name through the mud. The statement he just dropped completely flips the script on who the real victim is in this whole mess, and it's about to shake up everything people thought they knew.
Out of respect for my children and the ongoing legal proceedings, I will not be making any further public statements. I respectfully ask that speculation be avoided and that my family's privacy be honored during this sensitive time. The truth does not require volume, it requires...
What Topuria is claiming in his response.
Understand even more so why he would want to step away and not focus on fighting or defending his title, because obviously there's a lot going on. It's extremely sad. It's, I feel for everyone involved. I feel for his family. I feel for his kids. It's an awful situation.
January 3rd, 2026 rolls around and Ilia Topuria decides to post this statement on his social media addressing what he's calling completely bogus accusations. This comes right after Spanish news outlets were reporting that he got summoned to Madrid's Court of Violence Against Women #1 for a hearing scheduled for January 7th. But here's the thing, Topuria set the record straight, saying this summons wasn't about gender violence testimony at all. It was actually about family and administrative stuff regarding whether his daughter could travel outside Spain.
They have been excellent. We have a special connection. I have understanding without having to give a lot of explanation, understanding from them. From the very first moment, they have extended their hand. I have been offered their support in any time I needed it. So I don't really know. I'm very happy for the support I've received from them, for the understanding, and also happy about the step.
This wasn't even Topuria's first time speaking out about the situation. Back on December 15th, 2025, he had already posted on Instagram, explaining why he was taking a break from the UFC. Now, in this latest statement, Topuria is saying these allegations have zero foundation. He's claiming he's got all this evidence saved up. We're talking audio recordings, written messages, witness statements, even video footage. All of this evidence has been handed over to the courts, and he's going after her legally for attempted extortion, fake evidence, stealing his money and property, plus making threats against him.
Obviously, you just saw Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett for the interim title. Earlier, Topuria posted, "I'm dealing with some personal problems, so I'm not gonna fight the first quarter." So the winner of Gaethje versus Paddy will be the interim title, and then they will face Topuria.
The accusations are coming from Topuria's estranged wife, Georgina Euskategui. She went to Mostol's Court of Guard on November 18th, 2025, and filed this complaint saying Topuria was guilty of domestic violence, gender violence, causing injuries, and family abuse. After she filed that complaint, Spanish authorities put her in their Atenpro protection program on December 1st, 2025, following their risk evaluation.
I had to dig into this. I guess I misunderstood. Ilia Topuria made headlines. My belief through the headlines is that Ilia was walking away from the UFC championship belt, thus elevating Justin Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett to undisputed.
Topuria's January 3rd statement was really pushing back against how the media was covering his January 7th court appearance. He called out one Spanish news outlet for running a false headline, which they ended up changing later. He made it crystal clear that this hearing was just administrative stuff, only about his daughter's travel situation. Turns out Euskategui had asked the court for permission to take their daughter to the United States where her family lives. Topuria revealed he hadn't been able to see his daughter for 4 whole months even though he'd been trying. He said he has faith the legal system will eventually let him reunite with both his daughter Georgina and his son Hugo.
The story is that this made headlines for something that we were already told a couple of weeks ago, and there is no escalation from that, meaning Ilia Topuria is not vanquishing or having stripped from him the title.
These two got together around 2020. Ilia Topuria graduated from Miami-Dade College and got her postgraduate degree from Suffolk University. She built herself up as CEO of multiple companies in Florida, including Future and Energy and Future Alkaline Water. She moved to Spain after meeting Topuria at some dinner event. They had both civil and religious wedding ceremonies, apparently with a prenup in place. Their daughter Georgina was born in June 2024. Topuria also has a 6-year-old son, Hugo, from an earlier relationship.
The UFC doesn't exactly have the greatest track record of giving a shit if you hit a woman or not. John Jones, heavyweight champion of the world, arrested for beating his fiance. Arrested for it. Not accused of, arrested for it.
The breakup happened during summer 2025. According to Topuria's version of events, he's the one who filed for civil divorce months later after she made what he called completely unreasonable financial demands that he refused. Just weeks after he filed his paperwork, Ilia Topuria submitted her complaint.
Ultimately, with Ilia, he carries himself like a champion. You know, he's done it. You know, he's done a good job marketing himself. He hasn't been trash like, you know, in terms of some other people that we've seen across, you know, over the last couple of years. He's done a good job. So I'm not going to sit here and just throw heat at him and throw shade at him. I think he's got a good chance of proving, if he seems convinced he can prove her wrong or prove the allegations to be incorrect, then good for him.
Ilia Topuria's team fired back through her lawyer Cristina Correll Cortina on December 18, 2025. Their statement stressed that these proceedings involve a minor, so they should stay private, and they told the media to stop speculating about everything. Her side denied any extortion happened, saying the negotiations were just normal stuff that happens in divorce proceedings when you're dealing with financial agreements. They claim Ilia Topuria gave up her U.S. businesses to focus on raising their daughter, and she just wants what's best for the child. Her people are saying she's actually the one who initiated the divorce, and she's got evidence backing up her side of the story. They're claiming that once the truth comes out, everyone will see what Georgina went through with him.
As of now, there's no real timeline set in place. He spoke to ESPN Deportes about that, about his decision to walk away. Here's what he had to say, and I'll read the subtitles for you in case you're just listening to the audio.
There's been no restraining order, no arrest, no immediate legal action against Topuria. The case is still working its way through the courts.
As I've communicated, I'm going through some personal problems. I do not have an exact date when everything will be fixed. I hope that as soon as possible, as soon as it is solved, I will be ready to go back. In the octagon, I prioritize at this time the welfare of my family, of my children, my own. So as soon as everything is solved, I will be back to the octagon to give it the show.
How this whole thing played out.
And then he'll get back on track, and it's not going to be easy though. Like, people think like, oh, it's going to be done, it's going to swipe it underneath the rug. But the problem is though, is that there's time away from training, not just that, the mental game. He's not what he will be when he comes back, what he was.
The first red flags started showing up in October 2025, when Ilia Topuria started deleting most of the photos of them together from her social media. By the time fans caught on to what was happening, negotiations about money and custody were already going on behind the scenes and falling apart fast.
Will he come back being the same guy? Probably not. It's going to take him time to get his mental back on track. This sport is very mental. Everything is about it is mental. You know, whether it's the fitness, whether it's the conditioning, the diet, the nutrition, making sure that you're financially stable with your at home. You know, your trainers are all taken care of. Like, there's so much that goes into it.
Things got serious on November 18, 2025, when Ilia Topuria filed her formal complaint at the Mostale's Court of Guard. Spanish authorities followed their standard procedures, doing their evaluations between November 20th and December 1st, 2025, comes around and Ilia Topuria gets enrolled in the ATEN Pro Protection Program, receiving an emergency phone and protection measures. She turned down additional protocols like shelter options and stayed at the family house with her daughter and grandmother.
Ilia Topuria's fighting career, it's done. And it's a shame to see it end this way. Everything going on right now outside of his fighting career, personal life, that's big things going on in this man's life.
Topuria finally broke his silence December 15, 2025, with his Instagram statement where he alleged extortion.
He has all the money in the world, double champion, undefeated. But what a career he's had if it is done. I mean, just knocked out Charles Oliveira and went up to 155. Finished Max Holloway. Finished Alexander Volkanovski. And what a rise he came on since fighting Bryce Mitchell back.
The real story behind what happened.
I mean, what he has done and how he's ultimately changed the sport. But the weird thing about it is this not parallel to Conor McGregor? And look what Conor McGregor has seen. I mean, 2 years ago, we were talking about the same thing. After he pulled out against Michael Chandler, it's like, is this guy done? And what Ilia came out and said, I'm glad he came out and talked about it.
Uzcategui's lawyer came back 3 days later, completely rejecting the extortion characterization and asking the media to stop conducting trials in public opinion. But the complications went way beyond just the divorce. December 23, 2025, she filed a police report about threats and cyber harassment on social media. The harassment had gotten worse after Topuria made his statement. December 30, 2025, she filed an expanded complaint that included a medical report showing anxiety-related hospitalization and death threats. What's crazy is that Uzcategui was having trouble finding legal representation, which was an unexpected problem for such a high-profile divorce case.
You do wonder, at some point, will they decide to make that interim belt the actual belt if he's not going to come back anytime soon? I think I don't think that they're going to be forced to do that for the January event. We'll see what kind of timeline he's on, how long this is going to play out. But if it's by next summer, perhaps they make...
Topuria's January 3rd, 2026 statement directly called out media coverage of his upcoming hearing, accusing one outlet of publishing false information about what it was actually about.
And perhaps that's why a guy like Arman doesn't seem too bothered by what's going on. These things can play out in many different ways, and you're on the outside and then you're on the inside, and everything changes in an instant.
For the broad,
how the UFC handled this and the interim title situation.
Because there has been some rather strange things that have happened to him as of late. I mean, the number one contender for his belt, Arman Tsarukyan, ends up not getting a shot at the belt, has to go out and do another fight, which officially gets named the number one contender's fight, of which Tsarukyan wins, but he is not fighting for the belt. Hattie the Baddie versus Justin Gaethje are going to go ahead and fight. Though I don't know if either one of them has ever asked to fight the other.
While Ilia Topuria's personal life was turning into complete chaos, the UFC had to figure out some really tough decisions about one of their most marketable champions. The lightweight division, which Topuria had just dominated 6 months earlier, with that brutal first-round knockout of Charles Oliveira, suddenly found itself stuck in limbo, while its champion dealt with problems that had nothing to do with fighting.
He did also say that he wants to finish his MMA story and then go into boxing, but that's a lot of steps away, and I don't think we need to get into that too much.
Dana White, the UFC's CEO, first talked about the situation with a tone that surprised a lot of people who might have expected him to be frustrated that his headliner had become unavailable for who knows how long. Instead, White showed what you could only call genuine sympathy for what Topuria was going through. White's comments showed that even the UFC's leadership had been mostly in the dark about the details of Topuria's situation until the fighter made his public statements. The CEO showed unusual restraint by not getting involved with rumors, demonstrating a level of discretion that's pretty rare for an organization that often finds itself in the middle of heated controversies.
Just a very unfortunate situation for someone who, was on this meteoric rise, and will hopefully for him, if everything works out in his favor, be able to continue that rise. But obviously this is a huge obstacle on a personal level that he's going to have to overcome, and wish everyone involved the best, and hopefully it can be resolved.
White's attitude was completely different from how the UFC has dealt with other fighters' personal problems in the past. There was no immediate talk about stripping the title, no deadlines about returning by a certain date, and no public complaints about the promotional headaches Topuria's absence would create. When Topuria talked to ESPN Deportes about how the UFC was handling his situation, you could tell he was grateful. That final acknowledgement about being happy about the steps the UFC has to take was referring to the organization's decision to move forward with an interim title fight instead of waiting forever for Topuria's return. This was the smart business decision that let the lightweight division keep moving while its champion dealt with his legal problems. November 27, 2025, during a surprise Thanksgiving announcement during an NFL broadcast, Dana White revealed that Justin Gaethje would face Paddy Pimblett for the interim lightweight championship at UFC 34 on January. The arrangement was pretty simple. Create an interim title to keep the division moving, then unify it with Topuria when he was ready to come back. It was a solution that protected Topuria's status as the real champion while giving contenders a way forward and fans an exciting fight to look forward to. But the situation created questions about how long the UFC would keep this arrangement going. Analyst Chael Sonnen was among those arguing that Topuria's long absence might eventually require more serious action. Sonnen's initial confusion about whether the Gaethje-Pimblett fight was for the real title showed the broader uncertainty around Topuria's status. While the fight was officially for an interim belt, there was still a possibility that circumstances could change if Topuria's absence went way beyond what anyone initially expected. The UFC's pretty relaxed approach toward Topuria is different from how the organization has handled similar situations before. Some people pointed to past examples that suggested the UFC doesn't always show this much patience with inactive champions. This fighter kept the championship until he retired. This commentary pointed out the uncomfortable reality that the UFC has previously kept champions who faced real legal issues, making the organization's handling of Topuria, who hasn't been charged with anything, seem relatively consistent with how they've historically separated business from personal matters. How fighters reacted and what the public thought. The MMA community's response to Ilia Topuria's allegations and his break from fighting was all over the place, from people showing sympathy and support to harsh criticism based on assumptions of guilt. The split showed the complicated dynamics at play when a popular champion faces accusations that, no matter how they turn out, could completely change public perception overnight. Ariel Helwani, one of the biggest names in MMA journalism, handled the situation with his usual caution. His coverage focused on how serious what Topuria was facing was while avoiding the rush to judgment that some other reactions showed. When Topuria talked about the timeline for his return, he kept focusing on family priorities. The respect that everyone deserves. Not all reactions were careful. UFC featherweight Bryce Mitchell put out this brutal video on December 16, 2025, where he straight up accused Topuria of domestic violence, even though there was no conviction or even formal charges. Mitchell, who is known for his outspoken conservative opinions, assumed the allegations were true and went on a verbal attack that included calling Topuria a wife-beater, a coward, and saying he would rot in hell. Mitchell's video quickly blew up across social media, getting thousands of views and starting heated arguments about whether it was appropriate to publicly condemn someone before any legal decision had been made. Some people praised Mitchell for taking a strong position against domestic violence, while others criticized him for judging a fellow fighter based only on unproven allegations. The difference between Mitchell's approach and others in the MMA community was huge. Paddy Pimblett, who was getting ready to fight for the interim title that Topuria's absence had created, reportedly sent a supportive message to the champion despite their rivalry. According to various reports, Pimblett said he hoped Topuria would work out his personal issues so they could eventually fight in the octagon.
Sean O'Malley, the former bantamweight champion, had talked about the divorce rumors even before Topuria's full statement came out. O'Malley showed real sympathy for what Topuria was dealing with, recognizing that handling relationship problems while keeping the mental focus needed for professional fighting was an incredibly difficult balance. He noted that the public nature of the situation made everything worse and was particularly concerned about the impact on Topuria's children. The commentary from experts went beyond the allegations themselves to questions about how they might affect Topuria's career path when he left. This observation touched on a reality that went beyond the legal proceedings. Even if Topuria came out of the situation with his reputation intact and no formal consequences, the time away from serious training and competition would definitely affect his performance when he returned. Professional fighting at the championship level requires not just physical conditioning, but also the kind of mental sharpness that comes from constantly being immersed in the sport.
Some commentators took a more bold stance on what the situation meant for Topuria's legacy. One analyst suggested that if the break went on indefinitely, it could basically mean the end of Topuria's fighting career. Life. Why would he need to come back? The logic behind this conclusion focused on what Topuria had already accomplished and what he stood to gain or lose by returning. In 2021, the speculation drew comparisons to Conor McGregor, whose own long absences from competition had led to similar questions about whether he would ever return at the same level. The public discussion around Topuria's situation showed how fragile reputation is in professional sports. Allegations alone, regardless of how they ultimately get resolved, have the power to completely change how an athlete is seen. The speed with which some people rush to condemn Topuria based on unproven claims showed the challenges facing anyone accused of misconduct in an era of instant social media judgments. What happens from here? As 2026 began, Ilia Topuria was facing an uncertain future that would be decided not in the octagon, but in Spanish courtrooms. The January 7th hearing in Madrid's Court of Violence Against Women #1 was just one step in what would probably be a long legal process, with potentially major implications for his career, his family, and his reputation. The immediate focus of the January 7th proceeding was relatively narrow, figuring out protective measures for his daughter, including whether to let Euskaltegui take the child to the United States. This was administrative stuff, but the outcome would directly affect Topuria's ability to stay in contact with his daughter during the ongoing divorce proceedings. Topuria's statement that he hadn't seen his daughter in 4 months showed the personal stakes involved. For a fighter who had built his public image partly around family values and the importance of being a father, being separated from his children was a wound that no legal victory could completely heal. The legal situation ahead stayed complicated. Topuria was pursuing charges of attempted extortion, falsification of evidence, misappropriation of funds and personal property, and multiple threats. These legal claims, if successful, could clear his name and potentially shift public perception back in his favor. However, these kinds of proceedings often take months or even years to resolve, leaving Topuria stuck in professional limbo. The UFC's handling of the situation would also change, depending on how long the legal matters dragged on. While Dana White had shown understanding and support right after Topuria's announcements, business considerations would eventually become important if the absence went too far and take that call. The scenario described here was straightforward. If Topuria stayed unable to compete through the summer of 2026, the UFC might convert the interim title to a full championship, effectively stripping Topuria without officially using that word. Such a move would be consistent with the organization's past practices, which have shown limited patience for champions who can't fulfill their promotional obligations, regardless of why. For the lightweight division, the uncertainty created both opportunities and frustrations. The January 24th interim title fight between Justin Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett would crown a temporary champion, but the winner's status would stay dependent on Topuria's eventual return. This limbo state could potentially go on for months, affecting matchmaking and title picture planning throughout the division. Chael Sonnen noted how unusual Topuria's situation was within the broader context of recent developments affecting him. The comment emphasized the somewhat random nature of how the interim title fight had come together, not through the natural emergence of clear top contenders demanding a fight, but through the practical necessity of doing something with the division while its champion dealt with matters outside the sport. Looking further ahead, Topuria had indicated his intention to eventually move from MMA to boxing, suggesting he saw his fighting career as having an endpoint, regardless of how the current situation played out. But whether that transition would happen after a successful return to the UFC or after a long absence that saw him lose his championship remained unclear. What was certain was that the allegations from his estranged wife and the legal proceedings they had started would cast a long shadow over whatever came next. The recognition that this was a huge obstacle on a personal level captured the essence of what Topuria was facing. Professional fighters are used to overcoming physical challenges, injuries, brutal training camps, the punishment absorbed in competition. But the battle Topuria now found himself in was completely different, one that couldn't be won through superior technique or conditioning, but only through the slow grinding machinery of legal proceedings. What happens next will be determined by forces largely outside anyone's direct control. The pace of Spanish court proceedings, the outcome of investigations, and the willingness of all parties to reach some form of resolution that allows everyone to move forward with their lives.